They say New York's high society has the memory of an elephant and the loyalty of a jackal. Tonight, one woman is about to learn that firsthand. She's standing in a room dripping with diamonds and ambition, a ghost from a past everyone has conveniently forgotten. Her ex-husband, a tech mogul, floats by with his new fiancée, bathed in the glow of camera flashes, leaving her in a wake of cold shoulders and pitying glances. She's invisible, a nobody. But what no one in this room knows is that a secret held for 30 years by one of the world's most reclusive billionaires is about to be announced. And when it is the invisible woman they all ignored will become the most powerful person in the room. Stay tuned, because this is a story of betrayal, secrets, and the kind of epic revenge you only see in movies. The air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art tasted of money. It was a metallic, crisp flavor, an undertone to the mingling scents of expensive perfume, and the floral centerpieces that were probably worth more than a down payment on a house. Ilara Vance felt it on her tongue, a flavor she had once grown accustomed to, but which now felt foreign and faintly bitter. This was the annual Starlight Foundation Gala, the absolute pinnacle of New York City's philanthropic calendar. A ticket cost a staggering $50,000, a sum she'd paid herself from the modest savings she'd painstakingly rebuilt. She hadn't come to be seen. She'd come because the foundation supported arts education in underserved communities, a cause that resonated deep in her soul, a remnant of the art history major she'd abandoned 20 years ago. She wore a simple midnight blue gown by a designer no one would recognize. It was elegant, timeless, and most importantly, it allowed her to blend into the shadows cast by the room's more ostentatious displays of wealth. Her only jewelry was a pair of delicate pearl earrings, the last gift from her adoptive mother. In a sea of blinding canary diamonds and Colombian emeralds, she was a speck of dust, and that was precisely how Julian wanted it. She saw him across the room, holding court near the towering ice sculpture of a swan. Julian Croft, her ex-husband, the man she had met in a college library when he was a scholarship kid with a brilliant mind and holes in his shoes. The man she had supported working 2 jobs so he could spend 18 hours a day in their tiny apartment garage, coding the algorithm that would eventually become Omnicore, a tech behemoth that had reshaped global logistics. He looked every bit the titan of industry now. His tuxedo was bespoke, Tom Ford, his hair was perfectly coiffed, and his smile, once a warm, genuine thing, was now a polished weapon of charisma. On his arm was Isabella Sterling, his fiancée. Isabella was 10 years younger than Elora, a model turned influencer, whose father owned a prominent real estate empire. She was draped in a shimmering, practically transparent gown that seemed to be held together by sheer audacity and strategically placed crystals. Her laughter was loud and tinkling, a sound designed to draw every eye. As Ilara watched, a pang, cold and sharp, went through her. It wasn't love. That had died a slow, painful death years ago. It was the sting of erasure. The woman who had proofread his business plans, who had brought him coffee at 3 a.m., who had sold her grandmother's engagement ring to pay for their first server. That woman was gone. In her place was this ghost haunting the periphery of a life she had helped build. A few people from their old life noticed her. There was Margaret Dupont, whose Hamptons parties they used to attend. She gave Ilara a tight, pitying smile before her eyes darted away, searching for someone more important to talk to. Then there was Robert Chen, an early investor in Omnicore. He met Ilara's gaze, his expression flickering with a brief, uncomfortable recognition, before he turned his back and became deeply engrossed in a conversation about yacht maintenance. Each averted gaze, each subtle snub was a tiny paper cut on her soul. They weren't just ignoring her, they were confirming her irrelevance. She was the discarded first draft of Julian Croft's success story. The final crushing blow came as she made her way towards the bar for a glass of water, something to soothe the dryness in her throat. Julian and Isabella were moving in the same direction, swept along by a current of fawning admirers. They were so close she could smell Isabella's cloying rose perfume. "Julian, darling," Isabella said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness, loud enough for the surrounding cluster of people to hear. "Isn't that, what's her name? Your old charity project?" Julian's eyes flicked to Alara. For a fraction of a second she saw something in them, not malice but a flicker of shame, quickly extinguished. He gave a dismissive, airy wave of his hand. "Ancient history, Bella," he said, his voice smooth and dismissive. He didn't even look at Alara directly. "Some people just can't let go of the past." The circle around them chuckled politely. The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It wasn't just a personal jab, it was a public declaration. "She is nothing. She is beneath us." Alara felt the heat rise in her cheeks. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, to simply melt into the floor. She turned away, her vision blurring slightly. She found a quiet alcove near a dimly lit tapestry and leaned against the cool stone, taking a deep, shuddering breath. This was a mistake. Coming here was a terrible mistake. She had thought she was stronger, that she was past the point where their opinions could hurt her. She was wrong. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to be calm. She was Elara Vance. She was a survivor. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes of her marriage. She had a small but cozy apartment, a job as a research librarian at the New York Public Library that she loved, and a quiet sense of peace she had fought tooth and nail to achieve. She didn't need their approval. But oh, in that moment, standing alone in a room of 1,000 people, the sting of being publicly discarded by the man whose empire she had helped build was a fresh and agonizing wound. She was completely and utterly alone, or so she thought. The memory of their beginning was like a faded photograph, its edges soft and colors muted by the harsh light of the present. They had met over a dusty copy of The Wealth of Nations in the basement of the Columbia University Library. Julian was all nervous energy and raw intellect, his clothes a size too big, and his eyes burning with an ambition that both scared and thrilled her. Alara, an art history student with a passion for the Italian Renaissance, was captivated by his vision. He didn't just see code, he saw the future. Their early years were a whirlwind of shared dreams and ramen noodle dinners. They married at City Hall with 2 friends as witnesses. Their first apartment in Queens was tiny, the paint peeling and the pipes groaning, but it felt like a palace because it was theirs. While Julian coded, Alara worked. First as a barista, the smell of burnt coffee clinging to her clothes, then as a night shift waitress at a diner, her feet aching as she scribbled down orders. Every dollar she earned went into their shared account, which was really the Keep Julian's Dream Alive fund. She was the one who dealt with the landlords, who paid the bills, who remembered to buy groceries. She was his editor, his strategist, his cheerleader, and his anchor. When his first potential investor demanded a working prototype that required a high-capacity server they couldn't possibly afford, Alara didn't hesitate. She took the small velvet box from her dresser, the one containing her adoptive grandmother's antique diamond ring, and walked into a pawn shop without a second thought. The $5,000 they gave her felt like $1 million. That night, when the server whirred to life, Julian had kissed her, his face streaked with tears and exhaustion. "We did it, Ellie," he'd whispered. "You did this. I'll never forget it." He did forget. The success of Omnicore wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a rising tide. First came the move to a better apartment in Brooklyn, then an office space in the Flatiron district. The ramen was replaced by reservations at Per Se. Alara quit her jobs at Julian's insistence to become a support system. She managed their social calendar, decorated their sprawling new penthouse on Central Park West, and planned the lavish parties that were crucial for networking. She learned to differentiate between a Bordeaux and a Burgundy to make small talk with venture capitalists and tech journalists. She played the part of the perfect tech mogul's wife. But in the process, Elara Vance, the woman who could spend hours debating the use of chiaroscuro in Caravaggio's work, began to disappear. Her art history books gathered dust. Her own ambitions were packed away like old clothes she no longer had occasion to wear. Julian's world became her world. The shift was subtle at first. He started staying late at the office, not out of necessity, but out of choice. The excited, collaborative conversations about the company were replaced by him giving her condescending summaries. "It's complex stuff, Ellie. You wouldn't get it." He started traveling more to conferences in Tokyo, London, and Dubai. She was invited, but it felt more like an obligation than a desire for her company. She was an accessory, like his expensive watch. The day her world finally shattered was a Tuesday in October. Julian had just returned from a tech summit in Monaco. He walked into their minimalist white-on-white living room, the one she'd painstakingly designed from the pages of Architectural Digest, and he didn't even put his briefcase down. "Elara, we need to talk," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. She knew in that instant. It was the same tone a doctor uses before delivering a fatal diagnosis. He told her about Isabella Sterling. He'd met her there. He didn't apologize. He explained. He said that he had evolved and that his life was now on a different trajectory. He used corporate jargon to describe the end of their 20-year relationship. "I need a partner who understands my world, who moves in it naturally," he'd said, looking not at her, but at the skyline, beyond their floor-to-ceiling windows. "You've been wonderful, a great foundation, but the skyscraper needs a different kind of architecture now." The cruelty of the metaphor was breathtaking. She was the foundation, buried underground, essential but invisible, while Isabella would be the gleaming penthouse, visible to all. The divorce was swift and brutal. Julian's lawyers, a team of sharks from a top Manhattan firm, painted her as a gold digger. They argued that her non-financial contributions were intangible and unquantifiable. They minimized her early sacrifices, framing them as the normal support of a spouse, not a foundational investment. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed on a whim, when they had nothing, was ironclad. She walked away with a one-time settlement that was, in the context of his billion-dollar fortune, laughably small. It was enough to buy a modest apartment and live carefully, but it was designed to be an insult. It was hush money, a severance package for a 20-year career as his wife. The 2 years since the divorce had been a quiet, painful rebirth. She'd found the job at the library, reveling in the silence and the smell of old paper. It was a sanctuary. She reconnected with one or two old college friends who hadn't been part of her and Julian's society life. She started visiting museums again, not as a social duty, but for herself. She was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding the woman she had been before Julian Croft. But the scars remained. Scars of betrayal, of being made to feel small and stupid, of being so callously discarded. Coming to the gala had been a test, a way to prove to herself that she could stand in the same room as him and his new life and feel nothing. Standing in the alcove, the memory of his words, ancient history, charity project, echoed in her mind. The test was a failure. She felt everything. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had given him her youth, her dreams, and her unwavering belief. He had taken it all, built an empire with it, and then thrown her away like the scaffolding on a finished building. As Elara composed herself in the relative quiet of the alcove, the general murmur of the ballroom began to change. A subtle shift in energy, a coalescing of attention toward the grand stage at the front of the room, indicated the evening's formal program was about to begin. The house lights dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of the chandeliers and the bright, focus spotlights on the stage. The host, a well-known news anchor, offered some polished opening remarks before introducing the night's main event. It wasn't a performance or an award ceremony. It was an announcement, one that had been the subject of hushed speculation for weeks in the pages of the Wall Street Journal and Forbes. The keynote address was to be delivered by a representative of the Thorne Foundation, the philanthropic arm of the legendary, almost mythical industrialist Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a name whispered with a kind of reverence usually reserved for figures like Rockefeller or Carnegie. He had built his empire, Thorne Industries, from the ground up, with ventures in everything from aerospace technology to pioneering medical research. But Thorne himself was a ghost. For the last 2 decades, he had been a complete recluse, managing his vast fortune from a secluded, heavily fortified estate in upstate New York. No photos, no interviews, no public appearances. His extreme privacy had only fueled his legend. Now, word had gotten out that he was planning to announce the largest single philanthropic donation in modern history through his foundation. The entire gala was buzzing with the prospect of what that might mean. Elara felt a flicker of genuine interest, a welcome distraction from her own misery. She, like everyone, was curious about the enigmatic billionaire. A distinguished, silver-haired man in a perfectly tailored suit walked to the podium. He had a somber, professorial air about him. A small nameplate on the lectern read Arthur Lexington Esquifo, General Counsel for Thorne Industries. "Good evening." Arthur began, his voice calm and commanding, silencing the last of the room's chatter. "I am Arthur Lexington, and I have had the profound honor of serving as Mr. Marcus Thorne's personal attorney and confidant for the past 40 years. A respectful hush fell over the audience. This was the man who spoke for the ghost. "Mr. Thorne had intended to be here tonight," Arthur continued, his voice catching slightly, "to make this announcement himself. He believed deeply in the work of the Starlight Foundation. He believed that art was not a luxury, but a fundamental language of the human soul." Elara nodded slightly. She couldn't agree more. "However," Arthur paused, taking a deliberate breath, "it is with the deepest personal sorrow that I must inform you that Marcus Thorne passed away peacefully 2 days ago at his home. He was 85 years old." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Phones immediately lit up as people began texting the news to the outside world. This wasn't just society gossip. This was a global financial event. The death of a titan like Thorne would send shockwaves through the market. Elara watched Julian from across the room. She saw him lean over and whisper urgently to the man next to him, his brow furrowed. He was already calculating, strategizing. The man's death was just a data point, a variable in a market equation. Arthur Lexington held up a hand, waiting for the room to settle. His passing was kept private at his request, to allow this evening to proceed as planned. He was a man who, above all else, valued follow-through, and his final act on this earth was to ensure the follow-through of his life's ultimate plan. The intrigue in the room was now palpable. What could be so important? For decades, Arthur said, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the 1%ers before him. The world has speculated about what would happen to Mr. Thorne's estate. Thorne Industries is one of the largest privately held corporations in the world. His personal fortune is considerable. A gross understatement. Thorne was rumored to be worth north of $50 billion. Everyone assumed he would bequeath his empire to a consortium of charities or perhaps dissolve the company. They were wrong. Mr. Thorne believed in legacy. He believed in blood. What the world never knew, what he guarded as his most precious and private secret, was that he had a child. Another shockwave, louder this time. Marcus Thorne had an heir. The reporters in the back were practically vibrating with excitement. This was the story of the century. Isabella was whispering animatedly to Julian, her eyes wide. This was drama of the highest order, the kind of thing she lived for. His heir! Arthur continued, his voice rising with gravitas, was not raised in the lap of luxury. For reasons I will not detail here tonight, they were raised in humble circumstances, unaware of their true parentage for most of their life. Mr. Thorne only reconnected with them in recent years. He discovered them to be a person of profound integrity, intelligence, and compassion. A person, he knew with absolute certainty, could steward his legacy, not as a fortune to be spent, but as a tool to reshape the world for the better. The tension was unbearable. Every person in that room was leaning forward, holding their breath. Who was it? Was it someone they knew? A secret love child who had clawed their way to some semblance of prominence on their own? Arthur Lexington looked down at the paper on the podium, though he clearly didn't need it. His eyes lifted, and for a strange, unnerving moment, Elara felt as though he were looking directly at her. It is my solemn duty and my distinct honor to execute the final directive of Marcus Thorne's last will and testament, he declared, to announce his sole heir, the new majority shareholder of Thorne Industries and the new chairperson of the Thorne Foundation, to whom he leaves his entire unencumbered estate. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was a physical thing, a taut wire about to snap. That person is in this room with us tonight. The ballroom erupted in frantic, hushed whispers, heads swiveled, eyes scanning, searching. Then Arthur Lexington spoke the name, a name that, in that instant, shattered one world and created a new one. Ms. Elara Vance. The two words hung in the air, seeming to disconnect from Arthur Lexington's mouth and float through the ballroom like rogue notes of music. Elara Vance. For a full 3 seconds there was absolute silence. Not a quiet reverence, but the dead, vacuum-sealed silence of collective, system-wide shock. The name was so unexpected, so completely out of left field, that the minds of New York's elite couldn't process it. They were searching their internal databases, trying to place the name with a face of importance, and coming up with nothing. Elara Vance. The librarian. The discarded ex-wife. It had to be a mistake. A different Elara Vance. Elara herself felt the name as a physical impact, a punch to the sternum that knocked all the air from her lungs. It couldn't be. She must have misheard. Her mind, already frayed with the evening's humiliation, was surely playing tricks on her. She felt a wave of dizziness, her hand gripping the cold stone wall of the alcove to steady herself. Then the second wave hit comprehension. Like a slow dawn breaking across the room, people began to connect the name to the face. Heads began to turn slowly, at first, then in a frantic, cascading rush, all pointing in one direction, pointing at her, at the woman in the simple blue dress, hiding in the shadows. The first camera flash was like a lightning strike in the dim room, blindingly white. It was followed by another and then a relentless percussive barrage of flashes. The reporters, smelling the biggest story of their careers, broke from their designated area and surged forward. The sound was a deafening cacophony of clicks, shouts, and frantic questions. Ms. Vance, Elara over here. Is it true? Through the flickering strobes, Elara's eyes found Julian's. He was standing frozen, halfway between his seat and the aisle. His face was a mask of utter slack-jawed disbelief. The colour had drained from his skin, leaving him a ghastly pale grey. The wineglass in his hand slipped from his nerveless fingers and shattered on the floor, the red wine spreading like a pool of blood. He didn't even notice. His eyes were locked on hers, and in them she saw a dawning horror so profound it was almost comical. He wasn't just seeing his ex-wife. He was seeing a ghost from his past, transformed into a financial deity, a power beyond his comprehension. Beside him, Isabella's perfectly constructed mask of social grace had crumbled. Her mouth was agape, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and raw fury. The woman she had just publicly derided as a charity project was now quite literally the most powerful and wealthy woman in the state, if not the country. Her entire social calculus, the foundation of her world, had just been blown to pieces. Elara felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were floating above her own body, watching the scene unfold. The humiliation, the pain, the loneliness of moments before. It all evaporated, replaced by a roaring, disorienting tidal wave of shock. Marcus Thorne, the recluse, her father. It made no sense. She was adopted. Her parents, a loving schoolteacher and a firefighter, had died in a car accident when she was 19. They were her parents. This was impossible. Arthur Lexington's voice cut through the chaos. Security, if you please. A team of large men in dark suits materialized, forming a protective circle around Elara's alcove with practiced efficiency. They moved with the quiet competence of men used to protecting heads of state. One of them, a tall man with a calm, weathered face, leaned in and spoke softly to her. "Ms. Vance, my name is David. We're going to escort you out of here. Please stay close to me." She could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. Arthur Lexington had made his way from the stage and now stood before her, his expression a mixture of professional calm and genuine sympathy. "Elara," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. "I know this is an unimaginable shock. I have so much to explain, but this is not the place." He nodded to David, and the human wall around her began to move. They guided her through the frenzied crowd, a slow, inexorable march. The people who had snubbed her just an hour ago were now desperately trying to catch her eye, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of fawning recognition. "Elara, darling, I knew you had it in you," she heard Margaret Dupont shriek. "A brilliant move, absolutely brilliant," someone else shouted. They were like iron filings, instantly realigning themselves to a new, impossibly powerful magnet. The hypocrisy was so blatant, so shameless, it was almost breathtaking. As they passed Julian's table, he finally seemed to break out of his stupor. He took a step forward, his hand outstretched. "Ellie," he croaked, his voice raspy with disbelief. His face was a maelstrom of confusion, regret, and a dawning, desperate fear. The entire architecture of his power, his standing in this room, had been predicated on the fact that he was the success and she was the failure. That narrative had just been violently and publicly annihilated. Elara met his gaze. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The look on her face was a blank slate, a calm void, where all their shared history used to be. For the first time, he was the one who was invisible to her. She let her security detail guide her past him, out of the ballroom, and away from the life she had known. She walked out of the Starlight Foundation Gala, not as the forgotten ex-wife, but as a woman, reborn in a firestorm of revelation, leaving the smoldering ruins of her old life and the people who inhabited it behind her forever. The ride from the museum was a silent, surreal blur. Elara was ushered into the back of a black Maybach sedan, with windows so tinted they turned the flashing lights of the paparazzi into muted, distant fireworks. Arthur Lexington sat opposite her, his hands resting on a worn leather briefcase in his lap. He remained silent, giving her space to breathe, an act of kindness for which she was profoundly grateful. They drove not to her small apartment in Yorkville, but south towards the financial district, pulling into the private subterranean garage of a sleek glass skyscraper that pierced the night sky. Thorne Tower. They rode a private elevator, all polished mahogany, and silent, frictionless ascent to the penthouse floor. The doors opened directly into a sprawling apartment that was less a home and more a work of art. It was minimalist but warm, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a 360-degree panorama of Manhattan. The space was furnished with exquisite but understated pieces, and the walls were adorned with what Elara's trained eye immediately recognized as masterpieces. A Rothko here, a de Kooning there. "This was Marcus's city residence," Arthur said softly. "He rarely used it. It is yours now, of course, along with everything else. Alara walked numbly toward the window, placing a hand on the cool glass. The city lights glittered below like a fallen galaxy. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible. My parents. I had a mother and a father. I have their birth certificates. I have my adoption papers. Arthur gestured to a pair of soft leather armchairs. Please, Alara, sit. Let me explain. She did, sinking into the chair as Arthur opened his briefcase. He didn't pull out legal documents, but a small leather-bound photo album. He slid it across the coffee table to her. Your adoptive parents were wonderful people, he began. Marcus had them thoroughly vetted. He chose them himself. They were told you were the child of a young, unwed couple who couldn't care for you. They never knew the truth. It was safer that way. Alara opened the album. The first photo was of a young woman with a radiant, defiant smile and eyes the exact shade of Alara's own. She was beautiful. Who is this? That is your mother, Catherine. She was a brilliant art historian, a PhD candidate at Yale. She met Marcus when he gave a guest lecture there. They fell into a whirlwind, deeply passionate affair. He was already a powerful man, but he was also making powerful enemies in his bid to take over a rival aerospace firm. Their relationship was a secret. He explained that Catherine became pregnant. She was ecstatic, but Marcus was terrified. He had received credible threats against his life. Threats that mentioned targeting his secret little family. He was paranoid, but as Arthur confirmed, he was also right. His rivals were ruthless. To protect you both, Arthur said, his voice heavy with the weight of the memory. He and Catherine made an impossible choice. He arranged for your adoption through a private, completely sealed process. He created a new identity for Catherine, giving her the funds to move to Florence and live out her dream of studying Renaissance art on the condition that she never contact you. It broke both their hearts. He saw it as the only way to keep you alive and give you a normal, safe childhood. Alara stared at the photo, her mind reeling. A mother she never knew. A life in Florence. It was like a story from a novel. Did he watch over me? She asked, her voice trembling. Always, Arthur affirmed. I was his proxy. I received monthly reports from a private investigator. We knew about your school plays, your grades, your friendship with the girl next door. When your adoptive parents were killed, it nearly destroyed him. I had to physically restrain him from coming to the funeral and taking you himself. But he knew revealing himself then would only add to your trauma. He let you grieve, let you find your own way, always watching from a distance. He explained that Marcus had followed her life with Julian too. He'd despised Julian, seeing him as a user who was extinguishing the bright spark he'd seen in his daughter. He wanted to intervene 100 times, but he was waiting for the right moment. And then he got sick, Arthur said. Pancreatic cancer. When he was diagnosed 2 years ago, he knew his time was short. That's when he decided to break his silence. This was the part Alara couldn't reconcile. He never contacted me. He did, Arthur said gently. In a way. Do you remember about a year and a half ago, the New York Public Library received a massive anonymous donation to its Research and Preservation Department? A donation that specifically funded a new senior researcher position in art history. Alara's eyes widened. That was my position. That's my job. He created it for you, Arthur confirmed. He wanted to bring you back to your first love, art. He wanted to see if that passion was still inside you. And through the donation, he met with the library's board of directors, one of whom was an old trusted friend. Through that friend, Marcus began to learn about you. Not from a PI report, but from someone who spoke with you, who saw your intelligence and your grace firsthand. A memory surfaced. An elderly board member, a kind man named Mr. Abernathy, had taken a special interest in her work. He would often stop by her desk to discuss her research. He had been so encouraging, so full of questions about her life and her thoughts. Abernathy, she breathed. Yes. Arthur smiled. He was Marcus's eyes and ears. He would report back after every conversation. Marcus treasured those stories. He was getting to know his daughter, and he was so incredibly proud. He pulled out one last item from his briefcase, a simple, handwritten letter. He wrote this for you last week. Elara took the letter with unsteady hands. The handwriting was weak but elegant. My dearest Elara, if you are reading this, then my time is over and your new life is just beginning. I know you have 1,000 questions, and I know that my actions will seem selfish and cruel. To have stayed away, to have deprived us both of a lifetime. I have no excuse, only a reason I loved you enough to let you go. I chose your safety over my own happiness, but now I am giving you something else. Not just money. Money is a burden. I am giving you power. The power to be safe, to be independent, to be the brilliant woman I always knew you were. The world Julian Croft built for you was a cage. I am giving you the key to a kingdom. Do with it what you will. Build, create, protect, inspire. Live the life you were meant to live, not the one that was assigned to you. Forgive an old man's regrets. Know that from a distance you were the single greatest pride of my life. Your father, Marcus, tears streamed down Elara's face, silent and hot. They weren't tears of sadness or confusion anymore. They were tears of profound, earth-shattering understanding. Her entire life, every struggle, every quiet moment of resilience had been witnessed. She had not been alone. She had been loved. The secret history of her life was not one of abandonment, but of a fierce, hidden protection. She looked up at Arthur, her expression transformed. The shock was receding, replaced by a nascent, unfamiliar steeliness in her eyes. What do I do now? Arthur Lexington gave her a small, confident smile. Now, Ms. Thorne Vance, he said, using the name for the first time, we get to work. The week that followed was a masterclass in controlled chaos orchestrated by Arthur Lexington. While the world's media went into a frenzy, publishing speculative articles and grainy college photos of Elara, she was ensconced within the secure bubble of Thorne Tower. Her new life arrived in a series of quiet, efficient meetings. There were investment bankers who spoke of portfolios in the tens of billions, heads of corporate divisions, who briefed her on aerospace contracts and biotech research, and the board of the Thorne Foundation, who outlined philanthropic commitments that could alter the fates of entire nations. Elara was a fast learner. The same sharp, analytical mind that could deconstruct a Renaissance painting was now absorbing financial statements and corporate structures. The research skills she had honed in the quiet stacks of the library were now deployed to understand the empire she had inherited. She was not intimidated. For the first time in over 20 years, her intellect was not being suppressed or patronized. It was being demanded, respected. She felt a part of her long-dormant awaken and stretch. She made her first official decree on day 3. She appointed Arthur Lexington as the acting CEO of Thorne Industries, a move that calmed the markets and signaled stability. Her second move was to schedule a full audit of Omnicore. It was a subsidiary of a larger tech holding company that Thorne Industries had a majority stake in, a fact Elara was sure Julian himself wasn't even aware of. The tendrils of her father's empire were everywhere. It was on Friday, a week after the gala, that the inevitable happened. Her new assistant, a ruthlessly efficient woman named Zara, buzzed her on the intercom in her new office, an office that took up the entire top floor of Thorne Tower. Ms. Thorne Vance, Zara's crisp voice, said, Mr. Julian Croft is in the lobby. He does not have an appointment, but he is insisting he speak with you. He says it's a personal matter. Elara looked out the window at the city below. She felt a surprising calm. The frantic, humiliated woman from the gala felt like a different person. Send him up, Zara, she said. When Julian walked into her office, he was visibly diminished. The bespoke suit was the same, but the confident, predatory swagger was gone. He looked tired, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes. He took in the cavernous office, the priceless art on the walls, the sheer scale of her new reality. Ellie, he began, his voice strained. You look, well. It's Elara, she corrected him coolly, not standing up from behind her massive mahogany desk. And I'm busy, Julian. What do you want? The coldness of her tone clearly rattled him. He was used to her warmth, her deference. I wanted to see you, to talk, to apologize for how things have been. At the gala, what Isabella said. I've already forgotten, she said, cutting him off. It was a lie, but it was a powerful one. She gestured to a chair. Sit down. You didn't come here to apologize. He sat looking uncomfortable in the chair that was probably worth more than his first car. It's Omnicore, he admitted, his composure crumbling. We're in the middle of a Series E funding round. We need it to expand into the European market. But, since the news about you, our lead investor is getting cold feet. They're worried about market stability. The audit you've called, it's making everyone nervous. Elara leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. She remembered the night she had spent proofreading his funding proposals, the passion and hope she had poured into them alongside him. You called me a charity project, Julian, she said, her voice quiet but laced with ice. He flinched. I didn't mean it. It was a stupid thing to say. I was trying to, I don't know, impress Isabella. And how is Isabella? Elara asked, a flicker of cruel curiosity in her eyes. The gossip columns had been merciless. Isabella Sterling, the fiancée of the man whose ex-wife was now exponentially wealthier and more powerful than them combined. We're taking a break, he mumbled, looking down at his hands. She said she needs space. Elara almost laughed. The world they had built, founded on status and public perception, was collapsing under the weight of her new reality. Ellie, please, he said, his voice cracking with desperation. Everything I built, it's at risk. All those years of work. You remember, you were there, you helped me. That server, the one you bought with your grandmother's ring, that's the foundation of all of this. It was the worst possible thing he could have said. By reminding her of her sacrifice, he was reminding her of his betrayal. He was trying to leverage a history that he himself had desecrated. Elara stood up and walked to the window, her back to him. You're right, Julian. I was there. I was the foundation. You said it yourself, and you taught me a very valuable lesson. Foundations are meant to be built upon, and then forgotten. You don't see them, you don't thank them. You just enjoy the view from the skyscraper. She turned back to face him, her expression unreadable. The audit of Omnicore will proceed. Thorn Industries' investment arm will be reviewing its position in your parent company. All decisions will be made based on a strict analysis of projected returns and market viability. It's not personal. She paused, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the final devastating blow. It's just business, and our personal business, Julian concluded 2 years ago. Zara will validate your parking. He stared at her, speechless. He was looking at Elara Vance, but he was seeing Marcus Thorne's daughter. He saw a woman who spoke the language of power he had always craved, and she spoke it more fluently than he ever would. He had created a competitor he could never hope to beat. Defeated, he stood up and walked out of her office without another word. Elara watched him go, feeling not a sense of vengeful glee, but a quiet, profound sense of closure. The hold he had on her, the lingering sting of his betrayal, was finally gone. It had been replaced by a different kind of currency, one that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with self-worth. In the months that followed, the name Elara Thorne Vance became synonymous with a new era of corporate and philanthropic leadership. She did not behave like a lottery winner indulging in yachts and lavish parties. Instead, she moved with the quiet, deliberate precision of a master strategist. The audit of Omnicore revealed what she and Arthur had suspected. Julian, in his desperate push for growth, had engaged in a series of ethically questionable practices, overinflating user engagement metrics to attract investors. Thorne Industries' legal team, acting on behalf of the parent company, forced his resignation as CEO. The news sent a small shockwave through the tech world, but it was quickly eclipsed by Ilara's next move. She installed a new highly respected CEO, stabilized the company, and refocused its mission on sustainable and ethical logistics. She didn't destroy Julian's company, she reformed it, making it stronger and more principled. It was a display of power far more sophisticated than simple revenge. Julian Croft faded from the public eye. His engagement to Isabella officially ended. He was last seen, according to a stray gossip item, flying to Southeast Asia, reportedly to find himself. The empire he had built was still standing, but it was no longer his. He was a footnote in its history. Ilara, however, was just beginning to write her own. She poured her energy and her newfound resources into the Thorne Foundation. Her first major project was a direct tribute to the two mothers she had known: Catherine, her birth mother, and the adoptive mother who had raised her. She established the Catherine Vance Arts Initiative, the largest privately funded arts education program in the country. It provided grants for schools in low-income neighborhoods, funded scholarships for promising young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, and endowed museums to ensure free admission for all. She found the letter her father had written to her mother Catherine, the one explaining his impossible choice. She used the Thorne Foundation to establish a global network that provided legal and financial support for single mothers in crisis, ensuring no woman would have to make the same heartbreaking decision her parents did. Her public debut as the new face of the Thorne Empire was not at another glamorous gala, but at the opening of a new community arts center in the Bronx. She didn't wear a designer gown, but a simple professional dress. She stood before a crowd of local families, students, and reporters, and she spoke not of balance sheets or stock prices, but of the power of a paintbrush, the hope in a line of poetry, the future in a child's imagination. She was no longer the invisible woman. She was vibrant, purposeful, and in complete command of her life. The money her father had left her was, as he had predicted, just a tool. The true inheritance was the freedom to reclaim her own narrative. One evening, she was working late in her office, reviewing a proposal for a new wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the very place where her life had been so spectacularly upended. Her assistant Zara came in. "Ms. Thorne Vance, your car is ready." "Thank you, Zara," Ilara said, her eyes still on the blueprints. She paused, looking at the familiar layout of the museum. She thought of the woman in the midnight blue dress, hiding in the alcove, feeling the crushing weight of her own irrelevance. She felt a pang of sympathy for her, as one would for a character in a book read long ago. That woman's pain had been real, her humiliation acute, but it had also been the catalyst, the fire that had burned away the last vestiges of the person she was pretending to be. The strength she now wielded wasn't given to her by Marcus Thorne's will. It had been forged in the quiet indignities of her life with Julian, in the lonely years of rebuilding, in the resilience she had to cultivate just to survive. The money had not made her strong. It had simply given her strength, a platform to stand on. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the endless constellation of lights that was New York City. She was not just the keeper of Marcus Thorne's legacy, nor the ghost of Julian Croft's past. She was Ilara Thorne Vance, an architect of her own future, ready to build something beautiful and lasting on the foundation of a life that was finally completely her own. And there you have it. The story of Ilara Vance is more than just a tale of revenge. It's a powerful reminder that our worth is never defined by the people who discard us. It's about how the deepest betrayals can sometimes lead to the most profound discoveries about ourselves and the strength we never knew we had. Elara's journey from being an invisible ex-wife to a global force for good shows that true power isn't about money or status. It's about purpose, integrity, and reclaiming your own story. What did you think of Elara's ultimate decision regarding Julian's company? Was it the perfect revenge, or would you have done something different? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of resilience and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening.